I know it must have been tons of work behind the scenes. So thank you so much for putting in the effort to have this forum where we could get together virtually instead of in person. So I'd like to I guess hand it over to Chris to just say hello, since it's his library that I was talking about. Thank you so much for joining the panel.
Thanks, Carin. Can you hear me? Audio check.
I can hear you fine.
Okay. You probably can also hear my, I'm in Montana at a buddy's cabin who has internet. So he's resurfacing his logs. So you're going to hear a little bit of machinery running outside from now and then. If it's too annoying, let me know and I'll mute. But yeah, so excited to be here. Thank you guys for getting Clojure North going, as she said. And yeah, I don't know what the questions are going to be or what people want to know about libpython CLJ, but we're both happy to talk about it. I really have to thank Carin because she's done a lot of the examples that I use and I tell people about. So she's got as much experience using the library in a lot of ways as anybody. So yeah.
Yeah, so there's this, I'm still trying to get familiar with the webinar stuff, but there's a QA window where I guess you could put questions if you have questions, and I guess we can answer them in text, or we could just chat. So
yeah, if anyone has any questions for Carin or Chris, feel free to either do I think there's a raise hand button, or I think you can also go to the Q&A section and feel free to post questions.
Yep, I believe only the panelists are able to use their mics. So if you would rather say your question rather than write it out in the QA box, you can do the hand raise thing. And Nick can temporarily bump you up to panelist so you can ask your question.
oh, there's a hand raise, I think.
Okay, you can talk, Ray.
Hi, hello. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hi, hello. This is Ray, and I'm pretty happy that we have the option of libpython CLJ, that we can do a lot of interrupting these days. One thing I found particularly interesting is that there is a whole bunch of Python usage. For example, like in Blender, that you have Python embedded. So it's not easy to start Python within a JVM. So I saw there's this gentleman, Tristram that has got the Blender Python and Java bridge running, so that we can use libpython CLJ to do that. So my question is that, do we have any plans to add like first-party support to make this easier? For example, for now, libpython use this initialize thing that does a lot of like assumption on where the Python is and stuff like that. Do we have plans to like make a nicer interface so that we can plug in whatever Python, or even nicer that we can have some sort of library that connects the Python with a running JVM?
I'd like to respond. So let me try to rephrase the question a little bit. If I understand you correctly, the question is, your question is, can we plug in any Python to libpython CLJ? And the way that the Blender system works was really interesting, because he used the Python system to start a JVM, and then within that JVM rebound to the symbols in the parent Python shared library. That way is really cool, I think, and has some promise, but is a little bit sketchy because you have to make sure that you're going to load the same shared library that the Python's already loaded, and not all Python systems run from a shared library. So sometimes that system just can't work, period. And then what initialize does is it calls the system Python, and then it looks up where all the Python libraries are from the system Python, and then sets the Java load library path to find it. So that initialize call is designed to be as dynamic as possible and to dynamically bind to whatever Python you happen to be running, anything from 3.6 to 3.8 so far. It is not designed to be in any way bound to a particular Python. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that answers my question. So yeah, it would be nice to have some sort of interface to do that. But I see that the Panda CLJ approach is that it's use live patching, because Clojure is such an easy language to overwrite anything, anywhere. So, but yeah, that answers my question. Thanks.
Very welcome.
There's another one, I think, in the Q&A. Would it be possible to write Clojure code for Jupyter Notebook? Do you have any insight on that, Chris? It seems like another one for you.
Yeah, for sure. I was just finding a link that I want to post back real quick. Oh, well, let me figure out how I'm going to do this actually. All right, well, as far as Clojure code for Jupyter Notebook, I would suggest you check out a program named, or a library called Clojure that is being actively developed, and they're trying to figure out pretty sophisticated uses of Clojure through Jupyter, and they have got it working. So that is independent of libpython CLJ. But that way you can just use raw Clojure in a Jupyter Notebook.
I'd also like to point out that there's this product called NextJournal that I really enjoy using, and I did some examples of the libpython CLJ in NextJournal as well, but it allows you to combine, you could actually combine Python cells with Clojure cells and do even R and do it pretty multi-language. So depending on your use case, that might be something you want to look at too. Okay, there's a lot here. So, there's one from Max. It's how well does libpython CLJ support Python environments? Do people use it for non-data science stuff? How well are multiple interpreter instances supported so we can use Clojure as a means of concurrency for Python? I can talk about the multiple, I can talk about the Python environments because I've used it at work and at home with different, like I sometimes use it with Conda at work, and at home I use it in pip3. So it's very flexible. So I think whatever way you want to connect to it, you can support that. As far as the multiple interpreter instances, I haven't used that too much. So Chris, maybe you could talk about that in concurrency.
Yeah, so that's a definite possibility. I avoided that because your concurrency gains are pretty small there in a lot of ways, because you're always going to fight the GIL, which is an application level mutex that comes with Python. So the best way for me to do that would be something like copy the Python shared library, rename it, and then dynamically load it. So I get multiple GILs effectively loaded through different shared libraries. That would be a very advanced thing to try And that would allow you to use more concurrency with Python than you can now. As it is, the sort of Python multi-threaded approach with multiple interpreters, I haven't invested in much because it doesn't seem like the wins there are worth the engineering effort or the risk in terms of accidentally sharing an object that you didn't mean to or something like that between those interpreters. I want to add one more thing about the multiple environments. We have examples both in the Python, the CLJ Python repository, and I wrote a facial rec example on my GitHub, on my personal GitHub, that shows how to use Conda. And so what I do is I wrap Conda very cleverly with Docker, and in that way, I think that's the safest way to use a complex Python environment with libpython, because every other way I've seen, you run into problems with where libpython tries to find shared libraries, and if the JVM can actually find the other shared libraries that might be installed. And there's lots of binary level problems that you're probably not used to dealing with in Clojure when you start using Python the way I'm using it. So the best way, for sure, if you're going to get into a complex Python environment, is to run it via a Docker system, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think I just took the next question up because it ties into that. How do you handle dependency management for Python libraries, especially in non-local host environments? And packaging up via Docker is definitely the way to go. And just as a side note too, Nextjournal, which you're talking about with notebooks and supporting Python and Clojure and other languages, that's part of their base way that they do reproducible notebooks. They package it all up in Docker. So whether you have your notebook for person A, person B, they can reproduce it. I don't know if you had anything to add to that one, Chris. Okay, I'm looking at the next one. I've tried to run a very stateful script with +pi. I haven't actually heard of that one with libpython CLJ. Running the script once is fine, but running twice gives us the wrong answer because the state is started when it ran the first time. We want to run an independent process for each incoming request. At this case, is it better to run example Clojure Java shell, or is there something else libpython CLJ can do to restart it, I guess, so it can be run in parallel over time? That one's gonna be for you, Chris.
Yeah, that one's a tough one. So no, there's not. The Python interpreter does not gracefully allow me to finalize it and reinitialize it. Even though those function calls are actually available, any usage of the system, especially when you're dealing with some of the Python extensions after a finalized call, is likely just to crash. So your best move is what you suggested, is to use Java shell, or we could potentially set up some way that we create a remote Clojure process that sits just directly on top of Python, or whatever. It's some amount of network engineering to do that robustly.
I think the next one's for you too. It's about Python GUI.
We have a great issue. Well, the Blender example the first gentleman brought up, I think is one of the interesting example of this, in that he was able to get Blender to pop up a UI via libpython CLJ, but ended up finding it easier to use the Python's JVM bindings and then rebind back to Python. And I don't know why that is. And it really depends on what the windowing system you're on is, because Clojure tends to run things in a lot of threads, and depending on your windowing system, it may or may not accept you trying to open a network socket from outside the main thread. And that's a low-level detail of various windowing systems that we can't easily work around.
Cool. I think maybe we could both talk to the next one. It's about learning and being interested in machine learning and deep learning, and wondering whether Python, libclj, and alternatives are sufficient enough to dive into the industry with Clojure, or do you recommend starting with pure Python, and avenues for support for new people in the field, for advice, mentorship, and discussion. So I wish that libPython-CLJ was there for me when I was first starting to get into deep learning and machine learning a few years ago. It definitely makes it a lot easier from the learning side, but also we're using it at work now, where it just makes it easier to communicate and bridge between Python and Clojure. So you don't have to be blocked into just one option. You can use the Python library through Clojure. You can use a Python library alone. You can, it gives you more tools in your toolbox, because every problem has got a different set of needs that needs to be addressed. And you just, libPython-CLJ is a great thing. And yes, I think it's sufficient to start learning and dive into it. Just taking, as a first step, just doing kind of what I was doing with the examples, going to the Python pages and going through some examples and translating them to libPython-CLJ. I was really able to get my hands on the data and the problems, and through the REPL, being able to work with it through the REPL, you get to learn it better, I think. So I'll turn it over to Chris for his thoughts.
I think for sure, the best tools for learning deep learning are going to be in Python. If you want to learn it from a top-down perspective. So you want to start with training image recognition models or something like that. But if you want to learn it from a mathematics ground up perspective, we actually have maybe the best tool I've ever seen in Dragan's set of learning materials he's built with Neanderthal. And those you're not going to train a cutting edge facial rec system with that, but it is a foundational way to learn deep learning, which I think is also a piece of the puzzle. You probably need both.
Okay, so I'm reading the next one. I see why Clojure is versed in data science would be interested in libPython-CLJ. Would you say that libPython is more of a bridge between the two communities and between teams than a tool for Clojure evangelization? Interesting. Because intuitively, watching your talk, I was wondering what would be good arguments to drag Python developers and data scientists into Clojure. Are there any? The REPL, for instance. The talk reminds of this talk. Oh, the Joe Gruss notebook talk. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, bridges, it's definitely a bridge, and bridges work both way for good ideas to flow back and forth. And the REPL is definitely one of the strongest ideas that Clojure has. And just from my personal experience with working with a data scientist at work, she was very impressed with how fast I could move in the REPL. And depending on how you like to learn and how you like, she was very hands-on, liking to feel data. I think that REPL experience is very attractive to her. So I haven't converted her all the way, but it's a bridge that is great for ideas to flow back and forth. So Chris, do you have anything to say on that one?
Yeah, I have in that libPython-CLJ repository in the docs section, I have a new to Clojure document that tells you at least why I find Clojure really compelling. From a very high level, and it's very short. It's not anything else. When you learn a language, anybody who's learned a language or been with a language for 3 or 4 years, you always will want to learn more languages, and it's a natural progression to bounce between languages. So part of that is just timing. And if they've done Python for 6 years and they've hit all the problems of the ecosystem over and over and over again, even though Python's incredibly productive in a lot of ways, those problems can really grate on you. And then they're ready to learn something new, and they might be willing to give up some of the power of Python's deep learning for some of the power of Clojure's functional approach. Those are trade-offs that I think that that's really more of where I would go there, is you get to learn functional programming without having to learn some complex type system. There's a lot of good ideas in Clojure that aren't in Python, but I wouldn't try to, if someone's a strong Python person and doesn't want to switch, it's not a cell that's gonna work. There isn't one that I think would work in that case.
Any other questions for Carin or Chris? Oh, one just popped up.
Oh, I think this one's going to be for you. Would you tell us a bit more about the internals about libpython CLJ? For example, what happens under the hook when I create a NumPy array and I see a 2D vector in my REPL?
Okay. Wow. That is quite an onion that has a lot of layers. So we sort of starting from another level, we use a library called JNA, which allows us to find shared libraries on your system and find the symbols in them. And so we find the libpython CLJ library, and we find the symbols we need to start up the interpreter. When you say, when you create a NumPy array, you've loaded the NumPy module, and that load module call is actually a symbol in the shared library. And it returned a pointer, so it returned a long integer. And we interpret that integer to mean that it's a Python module. We add a ref count to it, and you have this, and we represent that a certain way using its own toString method in order in the REPL to do things. So you create that array via some attribute call on that module, and that again returns another long integer. And the reason that I keep specifying this at a low level, because there's like 3 levels of wrappers on top of these. You're essentially just communicating binary pointer data in between the REPL and the Python shared library, and we override like the toString method on the object that we give you, so that it calls all the way down to the Python's toString method and then marshals it across the shared library boundaries. And there's quite a bit going on there. If you want to learn a bit more about that, we have a blog post on our Tech Ascent website talking about how to call functions between languages. And that one goes through in some pretty explicit detail exactly what happens when you try to, for instance, call a Clojure, if you pass a Clojure function into Python and then Python calls it.
I'm glad you're here. Okay, let's see what those other ones. Any other libraries in Python which you'd recommend outside of the data science machine learning domain? Any library which covers a use case not fulfilled by Clojure and Java ecosystem, or which it does better? Yeah, I've been mainly focusing on the data science realm, just because that's an area that Python has the edge, because they have a lot of people in the industry looking into that. But yeah, I don't know if anybody's got any ideas. I mean, the graphing, like Seaborn, or just graphing generally, you know, that's some nice stuff. I guess in the chat, if you want to. Oh, somebody said, I haven't tried any home automation, but my friends use that with Python. So that might be a use case to try. That'd be kind of cool. I don't know if anybody else has any ideas out there. Okay, well, I'll read out the next one. I've been told that to best learn anything about data science and deep learning by using it on a real use case. Find a problem that needs it and work on that. However, I don't know what it is possible in the field until you learn more about it. Yeah, the egg thing, chicken egg thing. Do you have any advice about scoping a good problem to work on and learn without really knowing what is possible? Well, I'll give you my take on it, and then Chris can give you his take. This is kind of how I approach things. Is I am an information bore. I just like to just find interesting things, like read about it, and then just have it percolate like in the back. So that way you're continually building up this like context of, like, sometimes I'm interested in slime molds, sometimes I'm interested in robots, sometimes I'm interested in deep learning, and all of them, if you take a thread, it just takes you, you just pick one thread and it can take you in all sorts of different places. So I think there's the subconscious level where you're just building up this high context pointers to things. And then when you finally find something interesting that you want to delve into, you have a rich background of things you can pull against. So sources for that are like papers. You can read papers. That's an easy way to jump around and look at other people's ideas. There's just a wealth of things on the internet, but especially papers, I think, because you're going down and historically some stuff that people have forgotten about that actually yields some more interesting fruit than the stuff that everybody's on today.
My thoughts on that are in a similar vein. I would say let's separate data science from deep learning, number one, because in my head those are very different things, and I find data science to be really useful in lots of contexts. Like every day when you want to analyze, I don't know, you get a bunch of log messages out of your system and you want to know what's going on with the response times, or every time you have a list of 1,000 objects, there's probably data science you can do there, finding mins and maxes and means of various properties, or who knows what. Deep learning specifically is going to be used for a problem that is a little more in depth than that. And my recommendation is for data science, if you want to get into any sort of data science or deep learning, I would start with a course on data science from Coursera or one of the big firms. And I would also highly recommend Henry Gartner's Clojure for Data Science book, I think is the name of it. I really enjoy that book, and it takes you through the basic stats you're going to need, whether you do deep learning or not, and it goes through recommendation systems, and it goes through kind of a lot of the things that happen and that you're likely to run into whether you do deep learning or not. The set of problems you can use data science on encompasses the set of problems you do with deep learning. So a good foundation in data science is just automatically way more useful than a good foundation in deep learning, or it implies you've started the foundation in deep learning, in my opinion.
Okay. Question. Carin, you've been involved in the Clojure support of MX, if I remember correctly. Now you seem to be a fan of libpython CLJ. Does that mean you have no use for MX anymore? What will happen? Should we expect MXNet Clojure support to stall? Are they inoperable in some way? Okay, so yeah, I'm still involved with MXNet, but it's an Apache project, and it's like a huge project, and the Clojure part is just like a little part. And this is the thing, it's like stable. There's a wrapper around it, and you know, just letting it be and being Apache stable for people who want to use it. That's kind of, you know, that's not exciting to talk about all the time. So also the MXNet project is deciding where it's going to go for its 2.0. So since we just ride along on the interop from just the JVM side, we just have to see what direction that they want to take it. And because it's Apache, it's like whoever has the time and whoever wants to put it into it. So it's certainly not dead. It's, you know, if you want to use it and you want to contribute to it, that's what open source is all about. I specifically, when I got involved, made sure that it's not my project. Because, you know, my time in being involved with something is up and down. Sometimes I have a lot of time, and then sometimes I have to, you know, do mom stuff, and that takes up a lot of time and yard work. So, but it's open source, is out there. libpython CLJ is great, and I can like multiple things at once.
Yeah, I think we have time for that one last one.
Okay, I'll read this one out because I think we can both answer this one. What is a good resource for papers on deep learning, machine learning, and data science? Yeah, I have a, I'll post it later. I follow like a Twitter account that posts the newest deep learning papers, but I'll also, a lot of the proceedings of academic conferences, they'll post them all online too. There's a neural information processing, NeurIPS, and quite a few of other ones, depending on what your sub interests are. So those are good sources, but I'll try to post them a little bit later. Chris, did you have anything for paper sources?
My recommendation is to get in touch with a woman named Carin Meier.
Okay. I think it's about time, or
Yeah, yeah, I see there's one more, but let's move on to the next one. Thank you so much, Carin and Chris. I think this has been a fantastic experience for anyone that's interested in using Python with Clojure. So, oh, sorry, I realized my video was off. So yeah, thank you so much, both of you. If anyone has any questions for Carin or Chris, feel free to shoot a message to them in the Slack. I know you guys are going to be around for the next few days. Awesome.
thanks
All right.
again.
Take care, you too.